Yes, thanks, David. And apologies to everybody up front for not having video on this evening. I happen to be out of London at a retreat somewhere where I'm not entirely sure whether the Wi-Fi will manage to carry a video signal. So hopefully, by sticking to audio only, we'll get the highest possible quality and you'll be able to hear me the whole way through. So if I'm cutting out or anything like that, do yell and I'll see what I can do to improve it. But let's kick straight in. We'll start right on the hour, which is good. So good evening to everyone and welcome to this month's Grassroots Conference Call, the first of the year. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, and a special welcome to you. My name is Aaron Oxley and I'm the Executive Director here. I hope that you find this call interesting, you enjoy it, and most of all that it motivates you to get into action and to get more involved in bringing about the end of global poverty. So, first of all, a very happy new year to everyone. I hope you all had very refreshing breaks. Very much looking forward to working with you all over the course of the coming year, and imagine we'll have as much to do on the issues that we work on this year as we did in 2017, and although hopefully the political landscape will be a bit more stable, but of course it might not be, and we've got to be ready for that. Now, in our December action materials, we included a planning tool and a calendar for the forthcoming year, which hopefully by now many of you will have had a chance to look at. It's our best guess at the schedule of political events and other important moments during the year when we think we can have a positive influence on overcoming global poverty. But of course, it is subject to change as the world around us changes. If you haven't seen that calendar yet or you want another look, you can find that on the Take Action page of our website, which is in the section called Get Involved. Once you're there, follow the link to Opportunities to Shape the World. The link has a very lovely picture of a baby staring at the camera, and perhaps somebody else other than me could share that link on the Zoom chat and the call actually while we talk. So, many of you will have also received an email from me at the end of last year. If you had a chance to look at that, you'll have seen that we attached an overview of all the very powerful things we've achieved together in 2017. Really, when I look back over the year, I really can't help but be truly stunned, not just at the volume of work and everything that everybody did, but also all the powerful successes that we achieved. And that's down to things that you did. So if you have made even one call, met your MP just once, wrote even one letter, or even had just one conversation with a friend or family member about our issues, I just want to say a big thank you again for being in action with us, because that's how we make change happen, one conversation at a time, building the understanding and relationships needed so that the end of poverty becomes an inevitability and not just a dream. One of my favorite aphorisms is that all it takes for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. In reading the newspapers, you might think that the challenges the world faces with increased insecurity, insularity, global institutions and aid being questioned in ways they haven't been for a long time, you would think that things are the worst that they've been, and in some ways that's true. But you only need to look back at history, read yourself some Harry Leslie Smith, for example, to realize that we've had much darker days than this and we've come through them, and that we'll get through the current challenges that we have the same way that we've got through challenges in the past, and that's by standing together and supporting each other. And I'm just really, really confident that together as a network, we can make as much positive change in the world this year as we did last year, if not more. That standing together as a theme from my email. Now, I wrote, as we've seen, progress and successes aren't inevitable. We will only realize our vision of a world free from extreme poverty by 2030 if we continue to make smart asks of decision makers, such as the members of parliament, and strive to build cross-party support for international development at a time when politics has never been so divisive. We have a big mission ahead of us, but I have no doubt that we will rise to the challenge, mobilize, and make the most of the opportunities that we create, one letter, one phone call, and one meeting at a time. Now that's one letter, one phone call, and one meeting at a time. It doesn't sound like much, But as many of you on the call know very well, that's actually exactly how you change the world. It's one letter, one phone call, and one meeting at a time. Every one of these that you have with another person, whether they're in a position of political power or not, contributes to the big changes we've seen recently, such as the UK government's decision to fund polio eradication, £100 million last year, new money, or to prioritise research into overcoming diseases, to fight malnutrition and hunger. But each of those contacts you make helps show that there's public support for making positive use of Britain's position in the world as a leader in international development, and helps build politicians' motivation to do the right thing. And one thing we know for sure is that building these relationships has much more impact than people normally think, especially when the connection you're making is personal, passionate, and memorable. And it's always worth remembering that positive change in the world is what most politicians got into politics to achieve, whatever their particular political tradition or perspective. So by connecting with shared values around the things that we all agree on, such as the benefits of health and education, we create that political will, which results always talk about. This is what creates and sustains good decisions by government on how to deploy our international development budget. And speaking specifically about our development budget, some of you might have heard in the news last week that the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, still the Foreign Secretary, is keeping a close eye on DFID, fueling speculation that he's coming back again to the idea that he wants it to be part of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. But there's already been regular joint responsibility for policy areas and geographical regions across the two departments, and ministers who operate in both departments for some time now. And coordination across government is actually really a good thing. It's something that we're asking for more of, and for those other departments to learn from DFID's best practice and global leadership. We're going to be continuing to keep a really close eye on this as part of the work we're doing in collaboration with other international development charities. Our concern, as you heard on the call last month, is to ensure that UK aid is focused firmly on poverty reduction, and that this work is led by an independent DFID. This is something that we'll be coming back to later on in the year. Tonight, as I said earlier, I join you from somewhere in the English countryside south of London. I'm not sure exactly where, to be honest, and not that brilliant on geography. I'm here with just over about 30 people who all spend a lot of time thinking about international aid and development. And the story goes that we have a fairly stagnant understanding of what aid is and what it should be used for. And a lot of people are still trapped back in the 80s as to what aid is all about and what it looks like. And really that narrative is one that's unfit for purpose in a world where countries are getting richer and richer, and increasingly people that are living in poverty are not in poor countries. So this is not a new problem or issue for results to be grappling with. I mean, a long-standing part of our own story about aid has always been that it must serve the poorest people, not just the poorest countries. And so what I'm hearing all these other thinkers is to try and figure out how aid fits into that story of rampant inequality. We know, for example, that health spending doesn't rise as fast as an economy grows in most countries, so that even when countries are getting richer, they're not improving their health systems at the same speed, let alone ensuring that those that are living in poverty and that are marginalised are being reached with any services that are scaled up. So while there's unlikely to be one definitive answer to the question of what next for aid, there are some things that we know absolutely need to be a part of that story. And for me, the most important thing is this, that if we have the power to make the world more just, to make it fairer, to reduce human suffering and unhappiness, then we should do that, especially when it costs us so little. This, to me, is the bedrock of our common humanity, and this is the project that we're embarking on together this year, 2018. So I want to thank you all for being the good people that do not stand idly by, and I'm really looking forward to working alongside you for the next 12 months, and indeed for longer than that. So before we go to the topic of tonight's call and introduce our speaker, I'm going to hand over to Hannah, who's in the office with the London Group, for a roundup of what you guys have been up to this month.
Thank you, Aaron, and hi to everybody on the call. So there isn't too much to say for our usual roundup from around the network because of the Christmas and New Year break, but hopefully As Aaron has mentioned, you saw our email on New Year's Eve, which showed all the highlights of the 2017 Grassroots calendar. This included events on World TB Day, successfully campaigning for the UK to provide £100 million of extra funding to eradicate polio, the annual national conference, and our advocacy day on the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty in October. So if you didn't, then I believe the link has just been posted in the chat. So it's a really great review of all the things that you've been up to and a very busy year of campaigning and all the things that you've done that have helped make such a big difference throughout the year. So as most of you will know, in November, Penny Mordaunt was announced as the new Secretary of State for International Development. Mark from the Norwich Group sent her a welcome letter and received a very positive response from her office that specifically mentioned results. So this is really good. Well done, Mark. It's really great that we're on her radar so early on. Mark also met with Professor Laura Bowater from UEA, the University of East Anglia, who's a specialist on antimicrobial resistance, to talk about all things TB and AMR in advance of our 2018 campaigning on this issue. The Brighton Group has also been busy creating and writing a new blog, which you might like to have a look at. They are hoping to write a new post each month about all the monthly actions. So the new blog kicked off with a great post sharing all the things they've learned so far whilst campaigning with the results. I'd really recommend giving it a read if you haven't already, for some great inspiration and some good tips. So moving on, thank you to all of those who were able to get in touch with your MP in December and ask them to sign the cross-party letter to the Secretary of State on the Global Partnership for Education replenishment, and requesting a UK pledge to the equivalent of $500 million at the upcoming GP Financing Conference in less than a month's time at the beginning of February. Together with other organisations, the letter was sent on the 18th of December, and a grand total of 55 MPs signed it from Results and Partners. This is a really fantastic achievement and is the highest number of MP signatures that any cross-party letter from Results has ever had. So thank you so much to all of you who were able to get in touch with your MP. The letter also coincided with a petition hand-in from Global Citizen, Send My Friend, and the One Campaign to 10 Downing Street, which was from 1.4 million people. So together, these actions have really showed our leaders that in advance of the GP Financing Conference, the call for global education is louder than ever. Does anyone else have anything to add before I wrap up?
Where can we see the list of MPs who signed the letter?
It's online, there's a blog, but I'll post the link into the chat after. I will post that in a few minutes.
Thank you.
No problem. Is there any other updates? No? So before I pass back to Naveed, we've got a couple of dates for you to put in your diary. We've planned a Grassroots Advocacy Training Day on the 10th of February, which is going to take place in Birmingham. You'll receive some more information on this in the newsflash email that we're going to send out this week. It should be a really good day and will be suitable for both new and existing campaigners. And it should also be a good introduction or refresher of the advocacy skills that you need to get involved in the campaigns this year. We'll also be joined by Laura and Callum from the office, who were on our December call, and they'll help us to get to grips with the topics of transition and UK aid in preparation for all that we're going to do in 2018. As well as that, the national conference is now booked, and it's the weekend of the 2nd to 4th of June. So that's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and it's going to be in London again. So more information on this will follow shortly, and the details of how to book a space will come out soon. So that's all from me for today. So I will pass back to Aaron.
Thanks very much, Hannah. Great. It's always great to get these kinds of updates from around the network. So straight on to the topic of tonight's call, which is about securing some funding for the Global Partnership for Education. It's a subject that some of you will be familiar with by now, as we did quite a lot of work on this last year. Although, quite a few things, the timing of it was affected by the calling of the general election. As you can read in the action materials, the GPE is a very effective global facilitator of work to enable countries to develop sustainable national education plans. These enable more children to go to school and give them a significantly better chance of a successful successful future and to be productive members of society. As we'll hear more about tonight, it's not just about pumping more and more money into education, although it is true that in this area of international development, we have chronic underfunding. The Global Partnership for Education is asking for a total of 3.1 billion US dollars, that's not pounds, but US dollars, over the period of 2018 to 2020. You always want to get the period right. That we think the UK's contribution, based on its previous levels of leadership on global education, should be around the $500 million mark, as Hannah mentioned. That's $500 million over that 2018 to 2020 period. That's around 380 million pounds at today's exchange rate. So it's really essential that this money is spent on things that actually end up providing a high quality education, that this money helps us reach those who aren't currently able to access education, and particularly the most marginalized, and that it delivers tangible learning outcomes so that we can demonstrate that these investments are actually bearing fruit and changing people's lives. It's the real benefits of global education for poverty, and particularly the most marginalized, that we want to focus in on tonight. And we also know that the UK government has consistently pushed the GPE to provide improved evidence that their investments are being spent well. So let's hear that detail now. It's really my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for this evening, Nafisa Babu, the Senior Advisor on Inclusive Education at an organisation called Light for the World. I see you're on the call, you're still on mute, but I just want to say a quick hello to you. Let me finish my introduction, and then we'll go into the questions. So, Light for the World is an international disability and development organisation which works for an inclusive society where no one is left behind. They strive for accessible eye care services and support inclusive education, empowering persons with disabilities to participate equally in society. Nafisa is a qualified speech-language therapist and audiologist with a master's in inclusive education focused on the inclusion of blind students in regular schools. Over the past 16 years, she's used her professional qualifications and life experience as a woman with a disability from the Global South to research and advise on inclusive education policies and practices, to advocate for the rights of children with disabilities and people with disabilities, and to train teachers, education officials, and communities on all aspects of inclusive education. She's from Cape Town, South Africa, and has a good understanding of the realities in developing countries, and has worked in an absolute bucket load of developing countries that I'm not going to read out off of the list. Nafisa, welcome, and many thanks for joining us tonight. Let me just introduce you to who we have on the call. We're joined tonight by campaigners from all around the UK, many of which are very experienced at raising international development issues with the public, with MPs and the media, as well as others who are much newer to this kind of activity. But everybody on this call is really united by a passion to take really powerful campaigning actions to make the world a better place. We also have on the call our Head of Parliamentary Advocacy, Lucy Drescher. Lucy, do you want to give us a quick wave? Most people can probably see you. I see your videos on. Lucy is our Education Lead on the Results Office. She can also help us with any questions we may have relating to the current position of the UK government in relation to the Global Partnership for Education. So, Nafisa, our groups have 3 pre-arranged questions for you, and then we'll, as we normally do, and then we're going to open it up to the floor for other questions. For those of you that are on your computers, feel free to ask a question using the chat function. It's on either the left hand, right hand, or bottom of your screen, wherever it's managed to pop up, but it should be there somewhere. For those of you that are on the phones and would prefer to either text things in, or as opposed to asking them verbally, the number that you're going to be using to text in questions tonight, grab your pens, is 07906 662 571. That's 07906 662 571. So, Right before we jump into the questions, Nafisa, can we ask you to take a couple of minutes to tell us your story? Like, what is your role in relation to global education, and why does global education matter so much to you?
Good evening, Aaron, and good evening, everybody there from Results and all the grassroots campaigners. I am a huge fan of Results, the UK and Results in general, because I feel that the power of civil society, you can really harness that to affect change in the world. And I think you're doing a great job about doing that, going about things in that way. So I am passionate about education and development and in the developing world. I feel that it's the biggest way to lift people out of poverty is via education. And having a disability myself, I think that there's been a lot of challenges I've had to face through trying to achieve an education, and I feel that it's been a hard journey, and I would like to make that journey a lot easier for children in other countries. And I think that we have worked a lot in terms of disability rights over the past decades to improve the ways people see education for children with disabilities. And I think that we're now at the right moment in time to make that difference, to make that shift. So I have, my father actually is blind as well, and he went to school at a special school for the blind, and he wanted his children to go to a regular school and learn how to negotiate the real world that way, because when I was a therapist working at the special school, I realized that what children really need is to be, that social inclusion is so much more important to the way you actually interact in the real world. And I think that education prepares you for life. I think often many people don't really have that foresight to see those things. In the countries that we work, children with disabilities and other marginalized children come from indigenous communities that are second or third language, speakers or educated in the second or third language, or children who live in deep rural areas are often the most excluded in education. And it's really important that we bring everyone into the circle and that they can benefit from a good education, receive good learning outcomes, achieve good learning outcomes, and then able to succeed and earn a decent livelihood eventually and contribute to their communities.
That's great, Nafisa. Thank you so much for that introduction. I think that's really got a really good sense of where you're coming from, and your passion for the issue is just like super clear. We are really grateful that you're with us here this evening to help us understand more about what GP replenishment means in reality for some of the people who are most excluded at present. So let's jump straight in. I think we have a question from Macclesfield as the first question.
Yes, hello. The first question is, what are the main things that stop all children getting into school?
So some of the main things that prevent children from getting into school is that most in developing countries, most of the population live in the rural areas where schools are very far and few between. So this really stops children. They have to walk very long distances to go to school. And also often families have to make difficult decisions about whether they let their child go to school or do they rather help them, keep them at home and have them contribute to the well-being and welfare of the family by earning some sort of livelihood, like working on the farm or mining or earning some sort of income. There are also not enough teachers out there, so often children are doing, again, about 2 to 3 hours of contact time at school, and often by an untrained teacher. So they're not really getting an enjoyable experience at school, and that also prevents them. When they do go to school, they don't find any benefit from there. The classes are quite big. The teachers maybe not that interested or untrained, and then they lose interest in learning. But all of these things could be changed if the government had sufficient resources down into the education system to improve the quality of education, to good teacher training and building more schools, etc. And also raising awareness about the benefits of education to families who have never, maybe as parents have never gone to school and don't see the benefits of sending their child to school. So I think those are all some of the reasons why or things that prevent children or stop children from going to school or dropping out of school.
Thanks, Nafisa. We're going to go over to Stuart Valley for the second question.
Hi, Nafisa. What are the main barriers for children with disabilities to attend school?
So actually, I don't know, for children with disabilities, having a disability is actually one of the main factors that prevent children from going to school, above gender, above location. The things that really prevent them or stop them from going to school is some of the negative attitudes or low expectations held by parents and the communities of what a child with a disability is able or capable of achieving or doing. Because you can imagine these families in poorer communities, they are struggling just to make ends meet. And a family with a parent or an adult might say, "Oh, I am completely able and struggling to make my way in the world and cope. How is this child going to be how is this child going to have it any easier? They're going to face so many challenges. It's not worthwhile investing in their education." Also, I think because there's so much stigma against persons with disabilities in many communities still, and people feel that they are cursed, or families would hide their child with a disability and not want others in the community to know. They prefer to just keep them at home. So those are some of the attitudinal barriers. Other things are related to resources, and I think we have great policies in many countries that are pro inclusion of children with disabilities, but there's often a gap to actually implement it, because we are in general, there is a lack of data maybe on children with disabilities, and there aren't enough resources or schools that are close by to these children. So some children with maybe a physical impairment, who they may be visually impaired or have a mobility impairment, the distance to school might be too far, and it might be the terrain might be too rough for them to actually get to and from school, or they arrive quite late and they get punished and then decide not to go to school. Some other issues are that schools feel that, or teachers often turn children away or families away that want their child to be educated, and they say, "We don't know how to teach your child. We don't have the training. We don't have the know-how. It's best to send your child elsewhere, to a special school," which sometimes there are like 2 or 3 in the entire country. And then the parents are basically become despondent and they keep their child at home. Sometimes it's a situation of the schools not having adapted learning and teaching material, such as books in Braille or accessible infrastructure within the school. But at the other level, there's also the health issue, right? We don't have strong health systems with good rehabilitation services. These children are not necessarily going to get the assistive devices they need. Like a child who needs crutches or wheelchair might not have that to be able to actually just get to school, or might not have received the therapies or early intervention support to be able to know how to maybe communicate. So when they go to school, a child who is deaf, when they go to school, there's nobody who's able to teach them sign language to be able to communicate. So there's quite a lot of different reasons why children with disabilities don't go to school. But I think a lot of this is due to a lack of resources, and that could be overcome by organizations like the Global Partnership for Education. If they help countries to develop good education sector plans that are well funded, they would then have the means to be able to address some of these challenges that prevent children with disabilities from going to school.
Thanks so much. We're going to go over to Brighton for the third question.
Hello, Nafisa. The third question is, girls' education is such an important way of helping people out of poverty. What more needs to be done to help girls get into school?
I think there's been a lot of traction in the girls' education movement, and it's been fantastic with champions like Michelle Obama, like Malala, Rihanna, and different celebrities that have really championed girls' education. I think that's been really awesome. When we see things at a policy level, there are a lot of, when it comes to discrimination in education, UNESCO has this convention against discrimination in education. Lots of countries have changed their policies to be more gender sensitive. Many of them over the past 5 years have done that. So there's been a big policy shift, but there still needs to happen on the ground. There's still some major things, practical things that need to happen. We need to have more female teachers that can serve as role models. Just practical things such as now we know that there are children getting married earlier, or girls that are being married off earlier or becoming pregnant, that there are flexible systems to actually support them as a married girl, or to stop early marriage, or those are preventative measures. But also if a young girl is pregnant, that she can still continue her education. In some countries, if you do become pregnant, you are then immediately, it's impossible to finish your education. We've done a lot of things, I think, in terms of looking at learning material, textbooks, having more not being gender biased, or having girls in those traditional roles. And I think there is some of that is happening, but it wouldn't help if the narrative in the classroom is still science is only for boys, or if there's still that kind of narrative of discussion, or when teachers are saying these things to children, or families are still putting girls in boxes and girls and boys in boxes. So I think that there's a lot of attitudinal changes that need to take place for that are so deeply entrenched that will take a long time to address. But slowly, once we have more role models of girls in science, or girls in professions that are not traditionally male, or traditionally male professions, we would start seeing more changes. And when we have generations of teachers who are younger, who are more open to girls, and encouraging girls to do subjects that are seen as boy subjects, such as science and mathematics and things like that.
That's great. I mean, I think it's really that example of role models is hugely important in every part of life, and you see it constantly all over the place, really. Unfortunately, as I am in the middle of nowhere, my phone doesn't actually have reception, so I'm probably not the best one to be facilitating this very next part of the more agile questions that are coming in. So I'm actually going to throw over to Naveed to manage this now a little bit. Naveed, would you mind?
No problem. So yeah, I haven't had any questions yet sent in by text. So let's just take any questions from anyone. Let's just open up the floor to questions for Nafisa. So who would like to kick off? London, you look like you're trying to ask a question, but you're muted.
There we go. Hi, I just wanted to ask, it sounds like your charity does amazing work on physical disabilities. I was just wondering if you did any types of work on things like learning disabilities, and what the challenges are for different communities in terms of those kind of disabilities.
So my organization, yes, we do work in that, and we actually we do a lot of work with teacher training institutions. So I think if you want to improve the quality of education, you need to start with those teachers who are going to, or those student teachers who are going to be entering the profession. So we do look at how we could improve the curriculum and training and the quality of training that they receive at these teacher training institutions. And often before, lots of work with children with disabilities was, well, and still kind of is, spearheaded by NGOs. But you want the government or governments to take up responsibility and do a lot more. So what we are doing is supporting the government and training institutions to build their capacity, learn from some of the work of NGOs and curriculums that have been developed, and also look at basically study tours and look at different schools or teachers that have been using different methods, because often seeing is believing. So that is some of the things that we are looking at. And that means also looking at children with learning difficulties, because in most developing countries, even disorders such as autism is less known there, or how to deal with children with autism. And I am, and have been a speech and language pathologist, even children with communication difficulties. Most countries in Africa, for example, don't even have speech therapists. Only last year in Ethiopia, they decided to start a speech therapy course, and there are 20 students who are currently being trained. So that just gives basically a picture that there's also a big lack of expertise in these areas that also needs to be built up still. But it's definitely an area that we also work on.
Thank you.
That was a great question. Thank you for the answer. I've got a question which has been put into the chat box rather from Brighton. I'll just read that out for the people on the phones who won't be able to see that. It has been touched on a bit, but could Nafisa talk a bit more about what are the benefits of creating an inclusive education system, both to the individuals themselves and to the wider development of society?
So really, inclusive education has a lot of great benefits. It improves the quality of education on the whole by giving access to children, but to the most marginalized children, by having, basically, we want teachers to be more child-centered in their approach to learning, to see children for what are their abilities first, and then look at what are the areas that they still need improvement in. So it's a different outlook on how you see children, and not just basically teaching to the average, but looking at every child's strengths and abilities. So that will improve the quality of education, and also looking at teaching practices that are a lot more that embrace active learning, and that are much more fun and engaging for children to learn from. We also, the other benefits to having an inclusive education system is that besides improving the quality of education for all, it also basically improves the self-esteem of all children who are included, both children with disabilities and children without, if it is an inclusive school. Because an inclusive school is where there's zero tolerance bullying, and that basically diversity is embraced. And when children are in the setup, they are more confident and have a better sense of self-worth. It also improves the chances of someone having a decent livelihood. There are also several other benefits, like it has, in inclusive education system, you want to strengthen community involvement in education. And we need the schools that are most successful, schools that the community supports and encourages to be better schools. So it also, the other things that also helps to basically have a more rights-based kind of approach to have rights-based thinking among both teachers, children, and the community as well. It's also a lot more effective in cost-effective than special education. And I think I've mentioned it before about how in my own personal life, I've seen and witnessed how being in an inclusive school really, really gives you the strategies you need to cope in the real world. I think it also combats negative stereotypes about disability. When children see children with disabilities and other and children who are different, who come from indigenous backgrounds, or when they see them all together, they can see each other's appreciate one another a lot more. And I think the children who learn together essentially will learn to live together. So I think there's so many benefits to inclusive education, but more importantly, it really does boost up the quality of education and promotes a more tolerant and peaceful society.
Thanks for a very comprehensive answer there. I was writing down loads of notes there. Really, lots of things that I personally wouldn't have thought of, but it's obvious when you describe it. Really, it's really helpful. Thank you. We have a question from the Pool group. I'll go to next. Do you want to ask your question?
Hello, it's Angela from Pool. I completely agree with you that inclusive education with children together so that they understand each other and feel part of society is perfect and what we're all aiming at. But when you look at the difficulties of having teachers trained to deal with and to support children with all sorts of different disabilities, would you think that having special schools for some sorts of disability and disabled children may be a stepping stone towards that? Because otherwise, as you've already said, some children will go into a school and there is nobody there who has the skills to support them and help them get an education.
Thanks for that question.
That's a really good question. I think when we are looking at some of the countries that, in particular, that I work in, for example, South Sudan, they do not have any special schools at all. I think there's one school for the blind, but they had 7 children, and most of the kids are, because of the war and different other things, they're on conflict, they're no longer there. The thing is that in the majority of children with disabilities are found in rural areas, and I think that it's so much, it's really important that they learn with their peers, because we've got most countries have ratified the UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that promotes inclusive education and wanting to build and develop an inclusive society. The teachers, I think, definitely, what you really need is a teacher that's committed to teaching all children and that is creative and able to problem solve. And I think that is the starting point, and having a teacher with a positive can-do attitude. By waiting or creating special schools, we need to basically build up systems from point zero. As I mentioned before, in most countries, they're struggling to just train teachers per se. Then do not have enough trained teachers, or then they don't even have specialist training at all. It doesn't exist in the country. So I think if we had to do that, we would be missing out on a lot of children who currently need education as we stand. And I know that also it's really important not to separate a child from their family. And what we've noticed over years of segregated education is that children, the damage done to families by separating them means that these children who have been educated in special schools and boarding facilities have virtually no contact with their family. Their only family are the nuns, maybe, have been taking care of them, and other blind or deaf children they've communicated with. And I think that it's really not a good way to live and have community. Every child deserves to grow up with a family, a loving family, and even if it means coaching and supporting and counseling that family to understand their child's needs, and that process is well worth going through. And so I think in the process of training up teachers, I think the process of training up teachers to be more inclusive is a lot more productive and will pay off in the long run, because and I think it's a far better investment than to start off on a separate system.
Thank you for that. That's really, really helpful. I've got 3 more questions that I can see so far, and I hope we can get through all of them. We've got 15 minutes left. So I'm going to start with the one that's been sent in from Norwich, which is, do you give, I think that means your charity, do you give help to disabled people in adult education?
Yes, we do, actually, because actually the funny thing is that a lot of children with disabilities are found quite late. So I was recently in Ethiopia last month, and there was a grade 6 learner, and she was 23 years old, which technically is an adult. But lots of adults who only have an opportunity to learn later on are often taught through livelihood activities, basic literacy skills, adult literacy and basic functional numeracy skills, because this is often at a later stage of their life, they only receive some sort of educational input, but it would be attached to some sort of livelihood. So that's what we do.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answers that question. There's one from Jill here. I think this might possibly involve Lucy as well as Nafisa, but let's see how we go. Could someone say a bit more about GPE's strategy for inclusive education for children with disabilities? Am I right in thinking that DFID is making good progress on this? So,
okay, so this is my pet project at the moment. For the past 3-4 years, we've been lobbying the Global Partnership for Education to basically pay a lot more attention to children with disabilities and other marginalized groups. They have done a lot more work in girls' education, and that was partly due to the push from the Canadian government. The Global Partnership for Education recently did a stock take on how much disability has actually been included in the policies and programs of some of the developing partners. And they found that most countries, there was a study, I think, about 61 countries, out of 61 countries, they found that most countries had large-scale integration programs. That would be maybe a special unit class within a school or something like that. Others were 17 countries were piloting inclusive education. And then 7 countries that are funded by the GPE, their education sector plans had zero mention of persons with disabilities. And that's quite shocking, right? So we have seen over the past of years, there's been gradually a bit of more work in the area of disability, but a lot has been a push from organizations like mine and the International Disability and Development Consortium. So we've been trying to push them to give more attention to children with disabilities and to push governments to do the same and to actually explicitly mention them in their education sector plans, but not just mention them, have actual actions and activities and strategies that are geared towards supporting the majority of children with disabilities in their countries. There has been a big shift now in the recent strategy, the current strategy of the Global Partnership for Education, because we were for the first time involved in that consultation process. They had plans before in the previous strategy to do a lot of work on disability, and virtually none of them had been achieved. One of the great things about the DFID is that DFID had actually seconded someone to focus on inclusion and inclusive education to the GPE. So they have seconded a technical advisor there that's supported by DFID, which is really great because we've seen a lot more work in that area. And then also one of our consortium members have also basically supported a fellow. The idea is that basically the issue has been with the GPE is that they've said they don't have the capacity internally in their secretariat to basically drive the work. So there's been attempts to basically build their capacity, and with more funding, which is so important, with more funding, they could actually do a lot more in this area in disability, and that's what we're hoping for. So we launched a study in 2016 about basically it's called, the study is called Costing Equity. We were basically building a case for investing in disability inclusive education. And we've been doing a lot of advocacy and lobbying in that area, and we've developed a call to action. And part of the call to action is to ask the Global Partnership for Education to invest more in disability inclusive education. There's several asks in this call to action, and Lucy could possibly put the link up on that later on or send it through to you. But we just received news recently that the GP will endorse the call to action, which is a great move. It's saying that they're also making a commitment to the most marginalized group, because persons with disability are essentially the biggest group of marginalized groups of people. And they basically said they'll endorse the call to action, and we'll hopefully announce it on more publicly on Friday. So that's been a great move forward.
Great.
No, great.
Just can I ask Lucy just to add in on there on DFID progress, and also we have a question from Ricky in Macclesfield, which sort of fits in with that, which is he was under the impression from the end of last year that the UK government had already pledged 500 million to GPE. So could you update us on the state of the UK government, Lucy?
Okay, so the UK, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you? Yeah, so the UK government hasn't pledged yet. The case for investment has gone to ministers and they're looking at it at the moment, and they have said that they will pledge at the conference in Dakar. They won't pledge early, they will pledge there. We are continuing with all our partners, with all of you, to keep pressing for that strong pledge and to prove the impact of GPE. I'm pleased to say we're hearing really good things from the DFID education team in terms of their support for GPE, and they are about to launch policy refresh. So they're looking at all their education work and refreshing it and saying what they're going to do. And they're going to launch that on the 22nd of January, and we're hoping that will show a very strong case for GPE. And within that also they have got a strong, we really understand and we really hope they've got a stronger focus on children with disabilities, because there has been a lot more discussion around that. Lisa and I were both at a half-day meeting recently with DFID and civil society, which was about ways to work with children with disabilities and ways to improve inclusive education and the inclusion of children with disabilities. And the head of DFID education policy was there and listening to all of that and showing a lot of support. So I think we should see all of that happening. And we have also heard that DFID is very keen to push GP on this disability work that Nafisa has been talking about. So we're hearing really positive sounds about the fact that DFID wants this to go further. So what they've done so far, they want more to happen, particularly in terms of taking it from just a sort of strategy and results level down to the country level. So actually a proper implementation of those intentions. So we're really hearing good things in terms of DFID and its support for this. I think you'll have gathered maybe that the new Secretary of State, Penny Mordaunt, is carrying on Priti Patel's interest in disability and has launched the plan for a disability summit next year and all these things. So she's very keen to keep pushing on that agenda, which is really good news.
Thank you, Lucy. There's a couple of other questions which we've still got time for, I hope. A really great practical question from Peter.
Linlithgow. We've got one question from Linlithgow.
Oh, go ahead then. Go ahead, Bentley. Go ahead and ask your question. Oh,
hi, it's Wendy from Linlithgow. I wanted to ask, is any work being done on delivering education via distant learning methods? I'm thinking particularly of the expansion of the mobile phone network across Africa. Could that be used as a method to take education to the children rather than the children coming long distances to the education?
That's something that DFID and Priti Patel and now Penny Mordaunt are really keen on. They are really keen on technology and ways in which technology can enhance education. So yes, I think you can be reassured that where it is possible and where it can be funded, DFID will be supporting that. They are definitely keen on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that we are from the disability community, we are very glad about this move into technology, but I think that we're also cautious of the fact that technology can never replace a teacher at the same time, and also that the social benefits of being in the classroom are also incredibly constructive and building and contributes heavily to building someone's personality and I think that and their social community. So I think that technology is a great way to maybe not deliver, but also more support education. I think that's what we kind of like to frame it in that way.
Great, thank you. We have a question here from Peter. What focus is there on sanitation in rural schools, especially for the disabled? Is that something that you can speak to? So there are
a lot of safeguards around making sure that school buildings are accessible. Most development agencies actually have that as a prerequisite for funding that they give the government, or actual governments might even have the legislation. But how it actually happens on the ground is a whole other issue. Because if you don't have the people on the ground who are educated and knowledgeable and able to monitor the implementation of these better accessible sanitation facilities, then it's not necessarily going to happen. But what's been great is that we are working also with the community and persons with disabilities and the organizations to work in partnership with schools to build accessible sanitation facilities at school. And that's really been a lot more beneficial to the whole school community as well. And I think that a sense of ownership to the process, being part of it, and then also seeing how actually it's simpler than they anticipated, right? So those are things that are happening.
Thank you. We've got 4 minutes left and we've got one more question. I think we'll probably manage it. So let me read that out again. That's another one that's been typed in from Helen and Reg. Nafisa, regarding your point on children needing to be with their families, we understand there are many boarding secondary schools in Africa, partly because it's rural, but also because it helps girls in particular to study rather than get distracted by household chores. Can you make a comment on that?
Yeah, I think there's also a situation, some boarding schools, going to a boarding school is seen as prestigious, right? But they often there's often fees related to that. And children with disabilities come from the poorest of the poor communities and aren't necessarily able to pay for having their children go to boarding schools. I think it's more of the cost implication there as well. But a separation from the family, I think it's also a situation of at what age and in how and when is it done. I mean, lots of the boarding schools that children go to are more in secondary education, or at least the ones that I know of in Tanzania and Kenya, it's more for secondary education. And at this stage, we aren't getting children with disabilities even in primary education. So yeah, a lot of them that manage to go to secondary school do often use the boarding facilities though.
Can I just add something? Can I quickly say one thing? When I was working with Sense International, one of the downsides we found with boarding schools was that the deafblind children went away to school, they learned things and they learned skills, but when they went back home, their parents didn't understand and their families didn't know that they knew those skills. So they still went back to the old life they had of not being very included because their family and parents weren't aware of how far they'd progressed and didn't get the chance to see it. Whereas when they're being educated closer to their families see the progress and believe in how far they're coming, which I think goes back to some of Nafis's points about the family and parents seeing how much their children can achieve.
Thanks, Lucy. We've got a comment here from Jill, I think referring to the previous comment about the facilities in rural schools. She comments that we actually need more of that in the UK as well. We can't assume that we have enough here. I think that's a point really well made. I think we're coming to the end now. We are about 2 minutes from 9 o'clock, and it's a lot later than that in South Africa. So I'm going to hand back to Aaron. Thanks to everybody for those really thoughtful questions, and leave it to Aaron to kind of wrap up the call.
Yeah, thanks, Naveed, for handling the questions. That's all we have time for tonight, and also really a massive thank you to Nafisa for joining us tonight to share with us the real impact that education can have for some of the world's most marginalised kids. I think your personal experience and your voice has really helped our network of campaigners get to grips with the issue, and really we hope to be able to do some very powerful advocacy with our Secretary of State for International Development, particularly important in the days running up to a UK pledge that we've now had very much confirmed is scheduled for the 2nd of February in Dakar. So thank you so much, Nafisa, for joining us this evening, particularly given it's very late where you are. So it's been a real privilege to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
For the opportunity, and I wish you all the best for your advocacy, and like we said before, it's not about just the money, giving the money to that the UK government gives the money, but also that we have that we also give advice about how they should use the money, or encourage the GP to use the money and focus more on the marginalised groups would be a great way to go forward.
Absolutely, completely agree. So thank you, Nafisa. Thank you for everyone who's joined our call tonight. You know, if you look back at the sort of things I was talking about at the start of the call, I will say thank you again for all that you are doing, and good luck for your action this month to write directly to the new Secretary of State. Time is tight on this one. It's the last push before the pledging conference. So go straight to Petty Mordaunt. Tell her about what can be achieved with the help of a strong UK contribution to GPE. And we believe there's every chance of a really powerful UK pledge. Her officials are supportive. Her Minister of State, Alice Debb-Burt, we know is also very supportive. And as a new Secretary of State, she just needs to be convinced that there's public support too. Your letters, real passionate letters from real people going directly to her and her office, are going to really materially help in these last few weeks. So as always, please do get in touch with the office if you have any questions, you need more clarity on any data or anything that was shared tonight, or just if this is the first time you've ever written, you just want some help and support and guidance, we can give you that from the office if you can't find people in your group to support you with that as well. But please don't be a stranger and get in touch. Good luck, enjoy the rest of your evenings, and if you're like us, please do be paying attention on the 2nd of February. We'll see where we land. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
And a special goodbye to all of the Martians in Birmingham.
That's a good one.